I'm Tori Bedford. Tonight on Greater Boston, a new study from Harvard shows that renters in the country are spending more of their income on housing than ever before. I'll talk to one of the researchers behind the report and a local housing expert about what this means for Massachusetts. Plus, was Claudine Gay just the beginning? Professors are sounding the alarm about right-wing attacks on higher education. It's no secret that rent is getting harder and harder to afford in this country. But according to a new report from Harvard, the affordability crisis has reached an all-time high, and it's hitting people across the income spectrum. For more, I'm joined by Chris Herbert, Managing Director of the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, the group behind the report, and Lizzi Wyant, a Deputy Executive Director for the Metropolitan Area Planning. Thank you both so much for being here. So, housing is, this is a national report, but it's ultimately a very local issue. Can you talk about how the findings in this report, Chris, compare to the region of New England or Massachusetts?
Sure, and thanks for having us. In many respects, what's happening here in Boston is very much a reflection of what's happening nationally. We've seen rents going through the roof, and we've seen the number of renters who are struggling to pay their rent reaching record highs. The difference in Boston is that we are an economically strong region. So if we compare Boston to the rest of the country, our rents are much higher than they are in other parts of the country. We document the fact that the nation has lost a lot of rental units renting for less than $1,000 over the last decade. In Boston, we lost those a long time ago. So in Boston, what's happening is the shift in rents is happening at a much higher level. We're losing rentals under $1,400 in Boston. And so it's the same problem, but it's just all shifted over to a higher end of the market. But in both cases, in the nation and in Boston, it's people across the income spectrum who are really struggling to be able to afford rent.
Well, that was a really interesting part of this report that I wanted to ask you about. Lizzi, did you want to say something? Okay, I'm sorry. Just as of 2022, your research found that nearly 1 in 4 renters were severely overburdened by the cost of housing. So they're spending at least half of their income every month on housing. That's up from 15% back in 2001. You mentioned that here in Massachusetts and in Boston, people are making more money. I'm wondering how the report it shows a record number of households being cost burdened, but rent growth is flat, meaning that people, it kind of cooled off after this big bump in 2022, and people are having a more difficult time affording their rent, but rent itself is not necessarily skyrocketing, right? So is it that people are just are they making more money or just unable to afford rent? Like, how does this report square with the fact that people can't pay their rent, but rent isn't necessarily as high maybe as it was during this huge boom?
Sure. 2 things to take note of. One is that we're relying on big national surveys that come out with the lag. So our measure of how many people are facing unaffordable rents is from 2022. So there's a little bit of a lag there. And so you're right. When we report on what's happening most recently with rent trends, we find is that rents that were growing at double digits are now down to about 0. In Boston, I think they're growing at about 3%. That sounds like a good story, but when you say that rents went to the highest levels they've ever been, and now they're not growing anymore, this means the problem's not getting worse. It doesn't mean that you can now suddenly find an apartment that's affordable. It is the case that if incomes are going up faster than that, 2 or 3% of rents, but there will be some progress made in gaining ground on affordability, but we've lost so much ground that just growing at 0% or not growing at all is going to take a long time for people to get back where they were just a few years ago.
Lizzi, I wanted to ask you a little bit about how we got here, right? So I think housing has now become, in recent years, a huge issue, right? It's definitely a part of the mainstream. It's part of every political campaign. It has to be addressed. We're in a housing crisis everywhere, as we see from the report. How did we get here, and what are the solutions that are being proposed?
I think there's probably 3 main things that contributed to how we got here. I think it's the fact that we've had insufficient funding to meet all of our housing needs. We have incredibly restrictive zoning in Massachusetts, and it's all those decisions are made at the local level. And we just don't have enough affordable housing or affordability overall. And all of those things contribute to the fact that we have not been able to meet our housing targets or to produce nearly enough housing to meet demand.
Right. We saw in the report, in just a couple of years ago, we had this big boom of multifamily building construction. That slowed as well. But even then, most of that wasn't affordable, right?
Yeah, I think primarily what we're seeing is builders building at the upper end of the market, which is typically what builders will do, which is not a bad thing, right? If we build a lot of high-end rental housing, that means is that people will move out of their current apartment, move into that high-end rental housing, and vacate some other housing and lowering price points. It's called filtering. So we build a lot of housing at the top, and then that adds to supply and ultimately keeps our rent pressures down across the board. But in order for filtering to work is you have to build enough housing so that you have an excess of housing that allows for that filtering process to happen. And to Lizzi's point, we just haven't been building enough. As much as we're building a lot of apartments, the demand for apartments from millennials moving back into the cities over the last decade has been astounding. And so we haven't been building enough to keep up demand. That filtering process hasn't had a chance to work. And so rents are getting pushed up across the board instead of falling. I think to your point earlier, now we are starting to see that supply catch up with demand. Rents have started to have leveled off at zero, which in the long run, that's what we need to do to get the market back into equilibrium. But we don't live in the long run, we live in today. And so what do we do now about trying to help sure that people can find a house that they can afford?
Well, what do we do now? Because I think you're mentioning this kind of, I don't want to say trickle down economics. Obviously that's loaded, but that's kind of what it sounds like, right? Is that, if you build enough of these luxury condos, then eventually everything will become affordable. But when you have these government restrictions, as Lizzi mentioned, zoning laws and all these other sort of political things that slow the process down, what would incentivize me as somebody who, is going to put up an apartment building to make a percentage of that affordable or to create an affordable apartment building? Why would I choose to do that if it's going to be more costly and take more time and use different, more material? Like, why it's going to be a huge slog? What's going to incentivize me to do that?
Well, I think that's why we need some of the policies that are in the Housing Act that the governor proposed. We call it the Housing Bond Bill, the Affordable Homes Act, alongside some of the budget proposals that she also included in her most recent budget. There needs to be funding priorities to make sure that we are also providing stability, particularly for our lowest income residents across the Commonwealth. So we have to create some tenant protections because housing production doesn't happen overnight. It takes decades to get there, and we've been underperforming for years. So we can't, and nobody can live in a housing zone, right? People actually live in homes and in housing units. And so it takes a while to get there. So we have to put some protections in place on the policy side and on the funding side to protect low-income residents, whether they're renters or owners. And then you actually have to create incentives to get to the kind of production that we need. So in addition to, the luxury housing that Chris was talking about, we're facing this situation in Massachusetts in particular, where we're going to see a really large increase over the next 10, 20 years of households that are run by people over the age of 65 who can't afford to move. They can't afford to move out of their home into a home in their neighborhood or community where they can afford to stay and grow old. And so we have to think about the type of that we're also building and creating some of those policy incentives so that developers actually want to build all the housing types to meet the housing need.
Right. It's not just about building more multifamily housing or building more affordable housing. I think in the report it said that population is aging and the materials, the houses themselves are also aging, right? In public housing, there's an estimated material backlog of maintenance fees, right, of some $90 billion across the country. So we've got these houses that are getting old. We've got people living in houses that are getting a little older. What does that result in if we don't intervene?
Well, I think we talk a lot about new construction, but I think what this brings up is the fact that we have a lot of existing housing that needs to be retrofitted to be suitable for the population we have. And so if we're going to talk about aging, we have to talk about housing that's accessible. So we need to make sure that folks who would get to a stage of life where they have mobility issues can get around. So there's things like no-step entry, but making sure that levers are in the door so you can, with arthritis, you can still open the door, making sure that switches and the like are within reach if you happen to be in a wheelchair for some period of time. So there's ways in which we can invest in the existing housing stock to make it more suitable for people as they age, as well as adding new housing that's well located and can meet those needs.
Lizzi, some of this report shows growth in areas that are more affordable, sprawl. I wanted to talk about some of the other impacts, right, of this kind of planning or lack of planning, right? You see these huge racial gaps, wealth gaps, racial gaps in home ownership. There's huge disparities there. There's also people moving into areas that are more affordable, and that has a climate impact as well, right? There's an environmental impact on sprawl, as a result of sprawl.
A huge environmental impact as a result of sprawl. I mean, I started my career in advocacy focusing on transportation, and transportation issues and housing issues are really the same. If you can't afford to live close to your job, you have to move far away. And that usually means you need a car and your greenhouse gas emissions are going up. There are some really good policies out there and funding incentives to actually decarbonize housing, which is something that we have to do because the built environment really contributes to increased GHG emissions. And in fact, in Governor Healey's housing bond bill, she actually proposes dollars to decarbonize housing. And that is actually a really important part of this conversation.
It's kind of heartbreaking, too, because this report shows that homelessness has reached an all-time high across the country, and that data is always a little dubious because it's probably much higher than we can actually calculate. But that is, I guess, it seems the result of this lack of planning, right? When you've got people who are forced into homelessness and then eventually end up having to rely on other government resources. So maybe it's a planning ahead kind of thing to prevent that in the future.
Absolutely. I think there's a pretty well documented that the rate of homelessness is actually strongly correlated with the level of rents. And if you think about it, if you're someone who's facing some sort of hardship in life, you lost your job, you got sick, so you get divorced, these things happen, suddenly you can't pay the rent. If rents are low enough, you can find an affordable rental. If the rents are low enough, you can find a friend who's got a spare bedroom. As the rents go up and up and up, there's no slack in the system. So what we weren't surprised to see that with rents at these historically high levels across the country, the incidence of homelessness has gone up. We're often focused on the problem today of how do we help those folks get back into a house, which is critically important. But we can't lose sight of the fact that if we don't have enough housing to begin with, that's why the problem's getting worse. And so I want to go back to your earlier point. I don't want to be left on the record as saying that I'm only for building luxury housing. I think we do have to build housing across the spectrum. I just want to give a shout out to the MBTA housing choice law, which is, again, to your point about sprawl, it's incentivizing or requiring that communities served by the T have housing that's of a denser variety. It's only 15 units per acre. It's not skyscrapers, but it's located within a half mile of transit across the Boston metropolitan area. And that would add a lot of so-called missing middle housing, smaller scale, multifamily housing, transit oriented, could be the kind of housing that's suitable for people as they age. But if we don't address this broader housing supply issue, bring down the overall inflation and rents, add housing across the spectrum, we're going to see affordability continue to get worse, and we're going to see homelessness continue to rise.
Chris Herbert and Lizzi Wyant. Oh, sorry, go ahead. One last thing.
I think also that to Chris's earlier point that if there aren't enough available units, it is much harder for somebody who is facing homelessness to find a unit that they can afford themselves. And we have to build all across the spectrum. We can't just zone for it. We really have to build across the spectrum, and communities need the tools to be able to do that as easily as possible.
Great. Chris Herbert and Lizzi Wyant, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
The tumultuous ending to Claudine Gay's stint as Harvard president is still reverberating through the university. And as GBH's Kirk Carapezza reports, many professors are warning her resignation, quote, signals a dangerous intrusion of partisan politics into American higher ed. Kirk Carapezza joins me now, along with Attorney Harvey Silverglate, co-founder of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, and Ryan Enos, a professor of government at Harvard. Thank you all for being here. So, Kirk, if you can just give us a real quick sort of debrief from your reporting. It was a great piece, really extensive, but what's the vibe right now?
Sure. So the Gay's resignation kind of has sparked this debate on campus about the quote-unquote rise of authoritarianism kind of creeping into higher education. And we thought it'd be an interesting idea to kind of dig into that a little bit and see whether there's any merit to it. So on one side, you have professors saying, this signals this intrusion of partisan politics into higher education, a space where it doesn't belong, right? And on the other hand, you have free speech advocates and civil libertarians like Harvey who say that, that's overblown and that's opportunistic.
Right, Ryan, I want to ask you, what is the feeling at Harvard right now? How are professors feeling, and in higher education in general? What is kind of the sentiment? Is there that fear? Does that exist?
Yeah, it definitely exists. I mean, I think there's a fear that these university presidents were brought down through intrusion in partisan politics, very, very directly from these attacks by Congress and some of their allies. And the concern is that it really has these echoes to things in the past, like McCarthyism in the United States, and attempts, and successful attempts that when this has happened in other countries, where there's been this interference with higher education, and it's been damaging not only to higher education, but frankly to democracy.
You actually played this in your radio piece, but it's a clip of Joseph McCarthy in a 1952 RNC speech talking about just that.
One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many. Even if there are only one communist in the State Department, that would still be one communist too many.
So there's a historical precedent. I mean, even in the last few years, we've seen decline in democracy as tracked by this pro-democracy nonprofit Freedom House. I think they tallied 17 consecutive years of decline in democracy worldwide. We've seen incidents in Hungary, in Ukraine, where speech has been limited in higher education and in academia, and it's well documented that academia and, it is a threat to an authoritarian regime because it might create critical thinking, which could then question that. What do you think? You're saying this is just not...
It's nonsense.
Okay.
I do think the world is facing a serious problem with the rise of authoritarianism, as is this country, by the way. You look at what's going on, the contest for the president. The fact that Donald Trump became president of the United States is a statement about the rise of authoritarianism in this country. However, the situation with Claudine Gay has nothing to do with that. She appeared to testify in front of the congressional committee run by a Harvard alum, by the way. And she was asked a very sensible question to which she gave, I think, an accurate answer. It was about free speech on campus and, the Palestinian demonstrations. Those demonstrations were 100% constitutionally protected. The only time they would not be is if they ended up, if they turned into a riot. And she answered the question that this was an exercise of free speech. When Stefanik followed up, she couldn't explain. And the reason she couldn't explain it, she didn't really believe it. Her history as an administrator was that she had these diversity, equity, and inclusion seminars for students and even faculty members. I mean, I have a brochure that she circulated to some senior faculty members who were friends of mine, inviting them to show up for diversity training. If I was on the Harvard faculty and I got this, I would put obscene words on it and send it back to the dean's office. She was at the time a dean. These are faculty members being trained, really. She was not the right choice. And I could have named 12 choices better for the Harvard faculty, that they wanted diversity, they wanted a black woman. There are some fabulous black women in academia, including some at Harvard. And then they picked a bureaucrat. It was a terrible error.
There is diversity, and then there's equity, right? And when we talk about equity, we talk about, giving someone an advantage so that they can have the same opportunity as somebody who already has that, right? And often, I think you have to factor in, none of these things are happening in a vacuum, right? The status quo. So when you're looking at this country and you're thinking about the motivations behind people, questioning, you can see the consequences for people who have been pro-Palestine have at large been much more severe than people who are pro-Israel, right? And I wish we had a little more nuance in that conversation. But I think that, you know, when she's talking about these protests as well, you don't think that there was any kind of intentional maybe attack against her from, you know, billionaire hedge fund managers and established government, like these people are coming at her,
yes.
And then they come out with the
Let me say this. When you have powerful enemies like that, you have to be very careful what you say. She was not sufficiently careful. I mean, it's as simple as that. They were right. They were right. She gave them an excuse to get rid of her. She cut her own throat.
Well, I wonder what you mean about the diversity equity thing, right? Because
I think, you know, there's a whole group of people in this country who would like people in positions of authority, especially in the colleges, all of whom look different, but all of whom think alike. You can't do it that way. You can have people who look different, but they have to think differently as well.
Well, yeah, I guess it's if the status quo, if we're accepting that it's this acceptance that the status quo is male and is white. Would you say that that's wrong?
Let me tell you,
yeah.
I am not an acceptant of the status quo.
Yeah.
I'm fine being an upsetter of the status quo. But I think the status quo has to be sensible and has to appeal to the majority of America, has to be sensible enough to be explained to the American people and accepted by them, including the alumni body of Harvard.
I feel like there are so many different things happening here, and there's a lack of nuance that really bothers me about this whole conversation, right, where we're talking this and like DEI in contrast with the constitutional right to free speech, right? You know, there was this. You talked about just in your radio reporting, students who were asking a U.S. government entity to investigate Harvard,
right.
Represented by the Muslim Legal Fund, saying that they've been subjected to racism and harassment on campus. Jewish
right.
students have issued a similar complaint. They're asking for government intervention.
Right.
How does that square with academic freedom?
Yeah. So for our story, we tried to look beyond just Claudine Gay's forced resignation and look at, what some professors and researchers are describing as this playbook, right? This authoritarianism playbook that we've seen, Ryan, your research has shown, like in other countries, this is played out, whether it's Hungary, Russia, Ukraine. And we spoke with a researcher at the New School, Jessica Pisano. She studies authoritarianism in Eastern Europe, in countries like Russia and Ukraine, Hungary, where, they're imposing, it starts with censorship.
Right,
Things like you can't say poverty in the
right.
classroom, which she equates to, don't say gay in Florida. But then it ends with, forcing an entire university to leave Budapest and decamp to Vienna, right? That may sound extreme, but professors like Ryan and other professors are saying we should be on guard right now, that we should not just think that, America is exceptional and that because we have a history of democracy that we're immune to these similar kinds of threats. And in many ways, the playbook is to draw all of us into these wedge issues and debate things like free speech and DEI, and that by getting pulled into the wedge issues, then no one's minding the store, right? No one wants to be, fewer and fewer people want these jobs as college presidents because you have a target on your back all the time. So the playbook is, bury universities in paperwork and bureaucracy, draw them into these debates, about wedge issues that don't actually have anything to do with the mission of the university.
I mean, I'm hesitant to even get into this because I recognize, based on what she said, that it is a wedge issue. But talking about plagiarism, now you've said absolutely we have to have a higher standard for that, right? After finding that out about Claudine Gay, we referenced sort of vaguely the billionaire hedge fund manager who was really leading the charge against Gay, Bill Ackman. It was later found out that his wife, Neri Oxman, she had been a professor at MIT, and she had been found to do a very similar, almost exactly the same kind of plagiarism, right? And so if he had said that we're going to launch this investigation, and, I hope that he does, but at the same time, how would that work? Like, how would you determine what's a serious thing versus incidental, right? Or what rises to the level of punishment and what that punishment would be? So maybe that is just another wedge issue that something is, but
right.
these things come up more and more, and Yeah, I guess it's just like a
Right,
thousand little...
and one of the ways that researchers are advising American academics are to say to learn from Ukrainian academics, where they're fighting back. Literally, they're being, their institutions are being bombed. They're under constant attack, and academic freedom is under threat, but it's not on the decline in Ukraine. They're managing to fight back, and what they've done is researchers there have basically settled on standards and saying these are the things we can all agree on. Right, we might disagree about DEI and certain free speech debates and things like that, but we can all agree that this is why we're here and this is why it's important to fight for democracy.
Right, and I think we can all agree there's a difference between free speech and hate speech, right?
Well, no, there is not. We don't all agree. Hate speech is 100% constitutionally protected. Not only is it protected, but it's very important. I was a Jewish kid from Brooklyn at Princeton in 1960-64. It was very important for me. It was 52% of white Southern boys south of the Mason-Dixon line. The anti-Semitism was palpable. I really wanted to know who hated me, so I knew who not to turn my back on. How do you find out who hates you? You constitutionally protect hate speech. I am 100% in favor of allowing hate speech. Not hate violence, but hate speech.
Okay, so it would be constitutionally protected because it...
Not would be, it is. I'm an expert in that.
That's, yeah. Okay.
Trust me.
I mean, I know, you can't yell like, yeah, you're right. There are some gray areas there as well, for sure.
People say you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Not true. If there's a fire, you have to yell fire. It's falsely yelling fire in a crowded theater.
Yes.
I think what we're seeing is, of course, these sort of debates on a place like a college campus are complex. Like what crosses a line into harassment or hate speech or something. This is what Claudine Gay was getting targeted for, was trying to answer that question. This is what she was brought down for. And it's a complex question because people have a right to be secure in their education and not to feel like they're being targeted. But I 100% agree with Harvey about protecting speech. I mean, we're on the same page about this, 100%. The problem is when something like Republicans in Congress, or anybody in Congress, doesn't matter if they're Democrats or Republicans or anybody, come in and attack universities when they're trying to figure out those issues. Harvard is trying to figure out the complexities of those things and trying to give students an education and trying to protect speech and trying to do all those difficult things that universities do, but when they're under attack by outside political forces, it doesn't actually allow them to do it. It doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, I mean, this is an incredibly complicated conversation, and all of those little pieces and like making the little cracks, right? It removes some of the nuance. Yeah. So I hope that we can continue to understand, and your reporting has really reflected that. So thank you, Kirk Carapezza, Harvey Silverglate, and Ryan Enos. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight. We will be back tomorrow. Callie Crossley joins me to rant about the Oscar snub heard round the world. The Barbie movie is Oscar worthy, but what about the women who made it? That and more tomorrow at 7. I'm Tori Bedford. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Next time